Here's a guy who thinks that transcendental arguments can refute evolution.
D.
Hello?
Yeah. What's up?
Oh, wow, that's crazy. How's it going?
What's crazy?
Oh, I guess I didn't expect to be accepted that quickly.
Loco in here, bro.
How's it going, man?
Great, dude. It's loco, though.
It's crazy.
Crazy.
I'm fluent.
No good and loving God would allow such cringe.
It's not really. So I just had a question about your views on creationism and evolution. And I've heard in clips from you before, and if that's okay, if that's a topic you're willing to speak about, I guess.
The topics are pretty much anything. I don't believe in macro evolution. I'm a skeptic of that.
Where specifically is the line between microevolution and macroevolution? It seems like creationists define macroevolution as whatever amount of evolution hasn't been witnessed in real time. If we ever witnessed a new genus evolve, they would say that doesn't count as macroevolution because we haven't seen a new taxonomic family evolve. And if we saw a new family evolve, they would say that doesn't count as macroevolution because we haven't seen a new order evolve, etc.
Okay, and one of the things I've heard you say is based on the underdetermination of data.
Underdetermination.
Or underdetermination of data, sorry. And I guess what you referenced in that is that the data can be interpreted either way, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, that's a topic in the philosophy of science that has to do with the fact that multiple paradigms can interpret raw data accurately and sufficiently. So raw data itself can't necessarily tell you which is the right paradigm.
Well, if they're equally accurate, then why wouldn't all of these equally accurate paradigms be equally right? What's the difference between being accurate and being right?
Right, and I guess wouldn't a prerequisite of that be that the creationist paradigm explains the raw data sufficiently?
Well, the point is that you could conceivably have in both paradigms explanations for, endogenous retroviruses. Both a creation account and a evolutionary account can say why we see something like this or why we see similarity in DNA between a human and a chimp and a lizard. So both models can explain that.
Yeah, but only one of them makes accurate, testable, falsifiable predictions.
And so the point is that in most of the evolutionary or scientism-dominated paradigms, they think of these... Hold on a second. They think of the data being able to tell you which paradigm is true.
The data can show which paradigm is most useful for accurately predicting future observations. If one paradigm can accurately and falsifiably predict the result of an experiment, the data will show that.
And it doesn't. So the point is more than just that the creationist account can account for the similarity in the design of different beings.
And when you say account for or explain, are you using a scientific definition to consider that, or how are you defining
again, it's a question of epistemology, meaning justification in a broader sense. So I'm using the philosophical term in epistemology for how we account for our paradigms, our worldviews, our presuppositions, our axioms.
Okay.
Philosophy of science is its own discipline. If you take some philosophy courses or epistemology classes, you'll get into what's called a niche discipline called philosophy of science. And that's where this underdetermination of data thesis comes from.
Okay. And I guess, philosophy of science, but when you get down to actual science, wouldn't there be requisites to being what can be adequately explained by a particular model or another?
The explanations that creationists give for similarities between organisms could never be as useful because they could never do something like predict the features of future fossil discoveries and in what rock strata fossils with these features will be found. Evolution can be used to do this, however. That's why the Tiktaalik was inferred to have existed before its fossils were actually found. Evolution can also make predictions about what we will find in our genes. Since humans have fewer chromosomes than chimpanzees, the idea that we have a common ancestor would necessitate that one of our chromosomes is a fusion of two chromosomes, chromosomes, and that we should find telomeres in the middle of one of our chromosomes that prove that fusion. It turns out one of our chromosomes does have telomeres in the middle. The creationist explanation for similarities among life forms could never have made such a prediction.
Science, in terms of empirical sense data, cannot tell you what paradigm model is correct because it goes beyond the purview of scientific empirical sense data. That's a very limited tool.
So do you...
Theism also can't tell you what paradigm is correct. Even if there is a God who reveals truth to people, people are still fallible and therefore capable of failing to recognize the revealed truth that is presented to them and capable of mistaking false claims as revelation. What if there's a God who gives us truth through revelation, but that revelation isn't in the Bible? Even if there is a God who reveals the truth to us, your belief that this revelation is in the Bible can still be mistaken. Empirical observations can be mistaken or illusory as well, but at least being able to predict these potentially illusory observations is useful for navigating them. Science is effective at doing that. Theism is not.
Science can't tell us what's wrong and right, so you think that it can't tell us...
You don't hear what I just said? So you're just making assumptions. You didn't listen to what I said. I said
okay, I apologize. I'll listen again.
Scientific data is limited as empirical sense data and can't tell you what paradigm or worldview is correct.
Given that humans are fallible, I'm not convinced that there's any way to reliably determine that any worldview is correct in the sense of accurately describing reality beyond what we experience. What I'm interested in is what paradigm consistently seems to be useful for navigating experience, and that is not theism.
Right. A worldview would be a separate topic, because a worldview could be a misinterpretation as well, correct? Like, wouldn't you have to... The worldview that, whether there is or isn't a God wouldn't necessarily be tied to whether there is or isn't evolution or the earth is or isn't flat.
You're not understanding what we're talking about here. I'm talking about a domain of philosophy called epistemology, and you continue to think of it in the realm of scientific experimentation. I'm saying that epistemology is prior to that because it's asking more fundamental, broader questions about how science is possible. That's the issue at root that is being debated.
All that's necessary for science to be possible is to have experiences and form expectations about future experiences. Those expectations don't have to come true. It doesn't even need to be possible for those expectations to come true. Science is still possible if all of those experiences are illusory. Science is still possible in a universe that is not rationally comprehensible. Science is still possible if nothing behaves with any regularity at all. None of those things are required in order to have experiences and make inductive inferences about future experiences.
Not whether or not we do science or whether or not science can tell us facts about the natural world. I'm saying that science is like a tool, but a tool can't tell you where the universe came from or where even the tool came from.
Science can actually be used to investigate the invention of science. The history of the development of science can be empirically investigated. And to say that science can't tell you the origin of the universe assumes that the universe had an origin.
The tool has a use, but it's limited in the scope of what it can tell you. So the scientific method, for example, can't tell you how we got the scientific method or whether the scientific method is reliable.
Yes, the scientific method actually can be used to investigate how the scientific method was invented.
Well, that would be a separate question, yes, but I think the scientific method would be demonstrated as reliable by the fact that you use it in everyday life. Again, and it makes accurate predictions.
You should take an epistemology class because you're just stating sort of basic stuff that is not even, you're missing the point of what we're asking. The fact that you use something is not...
Well, I have taken an epistemology class.
No, you haven't.
I have.
The scientific method has consistently produced and improved upon models that can be used to make accurate predictions about future observations. It works in that sense, and it can be used to test whether it works. You can use the scientific method to compare the success rate of predictions derived through scientific means to the success rate of predictions made by astrology, for example. You can show scientifically that predictions derived scientifically have a greater track record of success than predictions derived astrologically. In fact, if it happened to be the case that astrology worked better than science, you could use science to corroborate that too. Whether science works better than astrology is a question that can be falsifiably tested by science.
I can tell by what you're saying that you haven't, or you didn't listen, you slept through it.
Okay, I mean that's fair. I mean, it seems
If you
like
had, you would
you're
understand
kind
the
of
difference.
avoiding. This seems like a way of you trying to avoid the fact that you have
No, you literally don't
model
understand
to
what I'm
put
saying.
forward.
You want it to sound smart on the stream, and you're not aware of the basics, and so you don't even know what I'm talking about. Tell me what justified true belief is.
I was actually just coming
What
here
is justified true belief?
Can I ask you a question
What
first?
is justified true belief?
Can I ask you
What is justified true belief?
A justified true belief, I would say, is a belief that is demonstrably and repeatably true.
No, that's not what justified true belief means.
Why not? Whenever I say that something is true, I'm not saying that it necessarily reflects some noumenal reality to which I have no empirical access. I mean that it seems consistent with experience. Whether that experience accurately depicts whatever reality exists beyond it is not something I'm concerned with, because unless that reality has consequences for my experience, it is of no consequence to me whatsoever.
And
Okay,
if you had, that would be the
definitions. Now,
first.
you asked
If
my
you had an
question, I gave you the
epistemology
answer.
class, that would be the first thing that you would learn, because that's what you learn early on in epistemology classes.
Okay, well, I've taken one. It was a while ago.
Okay, how are you not aware of the basics?
Well, I mean, I don't know, because it was 12 years ago. I don't do this every day like you, Jay. I'm honestly trying to have a conversation with you. I'd like to ask you one question.
I'm slowly and precisely answering and working through every question that you ask, and then you insert the insult that I'm trying to avoid the questions that you're asking. That's what pisses me off. Why would I be spending my time sitting here answering precisely your questions and delineating the difference between a theory and a scientific thesis and a paradigm if I'm trying to get away from your questions?
Okay, I didn't mean it as an insult, and I'm sorry if I upset you. I really am not. I honestly had seen some of your videos, and I was coming to ask because when you say that one of the paradigms, both paradigms can adequately explain the raw data, I don't understand that. So I was coming to ask what you see from a creationist perspective that would explain any of the data we see.
God did it. That's what Jay thinks is an adequate explanation.
So
that's what I was coming to ask.
Let me give you an example. So if I have a creationist model, if God created all the beings in his image, and primarily man in his image, and then the created order has a single origin, a single creator, that's one reason why we would see similarity between the DNA of a human and a chimpanzee, right?
See, he thinks the explanation for similarities between organisms is that God made them similar. Presumably, he also believes that the differences between organisms are due to God making them different. What testable, falsifiable predictions can you derive from this explanation? None.
Let me finish. The evolutionary model also says that I can explain the similarity, and that's because they have a common descent and line of origin. So both of those explanations explain.
Yeah, but those explanations are not of equal utility.
I know you don't like one better than the other, but they both have explanatory power.
I would expect explanatory power to be able to make falsifiable predictions.
So you're misunderstanding that underdetermination of data just simply means that you can't just get more raw data, because it's not going to tell you which paradigm is correct, because both can have explanatory power for the same data. That's all it means.
What do you think explanatory power means? You seem to think that any explanation that isn't contrary to the data, no matter how useless, has explanatory power.
It's not saying that Christianity is true because of underdetermination of data thesis. I never said that. It's just simply saying that the data itself requires a theory, and data is theory laden. That's all it means.
Okay, and so just to respond what you said, and then I'll be done unless you have a follow up. So what you just said was that's not a scientific explanation. It sounds in a 2-second bit like, oh well, they're the same creator.
Again,
so
you don't even understand the basics. You don't even understand the basics because it's so stupid, man. Honestly, what you're saying is so dumb, man. I'm struggling. I've been very patient, and it's like.
Yeah, you don't like disagreement.
So, you don't even understand what are the basics of philosophy of science and why that's prior to the doing of science.
I'm starting to doubt that Jay has a very firm grasp on the epistemology he claims to know so much about.
and we can make this really simple, really quick. How do you know the scientific method is true?
If you think the scientific method has a truth value, you don't understand philosophy of science. The scientific method is not a claim that can have a truth value. It can't be true or false because a method is not a claim. We use it because it has a long track record of helping us make models that produce predictions that consistently seem to match experience. Other paradigms do not have such a track record.
Because you test it, and if you can make
How do you test the method itself? The method itself.
You make predictions, and they have explanatory power.
The method itself. You don't even understand. You can't even understand the question I'm asking you.
As I previously explained, you can compare the reliability of the scientific method to astrology or numerology or palm reading, and you can use the scientific method to do so. Get a bunch of astrologers, palm readers, or whatever kind of fortune tellers you want to predict what the weather will be like over the next week in 1,000 cities. Then compare their success rate to the success rate of meteorologists doing the same thing. As fallible as meteorologists are, I feel quite confident that they will have a higher rate of success than the woo-woo fortune tellers. That's how you can use the method to test the method itself. This isn't circular because the idea that science is more effective at coming up with models that produce more accurate predictions than any of these other approaches is falsifiable. If palm reading turns out to be more reliable than science, then you can even use science to corroborate that.
I think I'm asking you if we do science and if science predicts things. I'm asking you a higher order question. The method itself, the scientific method itself, is that under a microscope?
The claim that science produces reliable predictions can be tested scientifically, if that's what you mean.
No, it's a logical principle.
Oh, it's a logical principle. Is logic found under a microscope?
No, it's not.
So you believe in things that you can't see?
You actually can see logic. You can see it work in logic circuits, for example.
I do believe in thought, yes.
Oh, so logic is thought?
Logic is the set of rules that describe what kinds of thoughts we seem to be able to make sense of and which kinds of thoughts we can't seem to make sense of.
Yes, it is.
Logic is thought. So the scientific method...
It's a way of describing thought, yes.
So scientific method is only in your head?
No, it's also a behavior.
What do you think, it's like floating around or something?
Okay, right. So the scientific method is only in your head. Good job, dude. This is why it's impossible to talk to people who are extremely confident in their ignorance. Aitley, what's up, man? He didn't even realize that he was walking right into the most ridiculous, easy trap, affirming that the scientific method is thought and is in his head.
You didn't answer his question about whether you think it's some free-floating woo-woo platonic form or not.
Then you can't prove, test it, or verify it.
Given that it's a behavior, and behaviors and their consequences are empirically observable, yes, you can observe it and test claims about it. You can, in fact, corroborate the claim that it is a more effective means of coming up with effective predictive models.
If it's only in your head, and if you're a materialist, then what's in your head is just random neurons firing.
What materialist says that neurons fire randomly?
So let's start with numbers. Okay, so everybody knows, hopefully you've read it. I wrote the essay several years ago, back in 2013. Numbers prove God, and I was just pointing out that, remember, as I said earlier, that there are different transcendental arguments, different transcendentals, and we can kind of group them all under one big one because none of these things operate on their own. Right? I mean, it's not like numbers just exist apart from other things like concepts or symbols or words or minds, okay?
Right, numbers are ideas, and ideas are things that brains do.
There's no realm of numbers floating out there like Plato thought that don't relate to God.
Nor are there numbers floating around that do relate to God. Numbers are ideas, and ideas are things that brains do.
Or that don't relate to the human mind. There's no sense in which we can speak of language or communication, for example, that doesn't also assume humans and communicators and, well, you could even argue human beings themselves, right?
Only humans have language, but I don't think you could accurately say that humans are the only animals that communicate at all. Many animals have ways of giving each other information.
So, for example, if we were to talk about linguistic philosophy and communicating truths through language, right? language is full of transcendental arguments. This is why some of the presently living philosophers who do work in transcendental arguments, they often talk about language, because language is full of this kind of stuff. For example, we assume that predicates and subjects make meaningful connections about things in the world.
That depends on what you mean by in the world. I use subjects and predicates to describe things in my experience, but I make no assumption whatsoever that my experiences accurately portray noumenal reality.
All right, subject and predicate in sentence. We assume that the words and the symbols used in the sentences, doesn't matter what language, refer to the same objects or concepts.
No, I don't. It would make no sense for any particular word to have multiple meanings if we were all to assume that. Whenever you ask Jordan Peterson whether he believes in God, he asks what you mean when you use each word in that question. He wouldn't do that if he were just assuming that each word is consistently used to refer to the same concept.
Now, let's take a materialist test case to show how stupid this is from the materialist perspective. When we talk about this, was what was going on in the debate with Infidel on Boiler Room, the Infidel Pharaoh debate that we had the other day, where we were talking about scientism, and he was saying that the scientific process, finally, after a while, we got him to admit that, yes, it uses logic. Well, of course it does. There's a logical process and flow to the scientific method. Now, is logic itself the subject of the scientific method when the scientist is studying the earthworm? No.
No, we use different methods to test logic. We don't do it empirically, but it is based on experience. I believe in the law of non-contradiction because if I try to think of something as both being true and false at the same time and in the same respect, I find that I can't. I believe it because I don't understand what it would mean for that law to not be true. That doesn't demonstrate that logic is a phenomenon that exists outside of my own brain. The only evidence that I have that it exists in other people's brains is that other people behave as though they too are unable to understand contradictions. That's certainly not evidence that logic must be based in a God.
Of course not. But he's using it. Yes, obviously. So we have, on the one hand, the scientist studying the earthworm, doing his hypothesis, forming his, theories or whatever. And then he's going through this process of testing, experimentation, reasoning to come to conclusions, to sort out the true evidence from the false evidence, the control factors from the anomalies, blah, blah, blah. All of this is utilizing logic.
Jay thinks he's Rick Sanchez.
Okay. So logic is obviously assumed in the process of scientific investigation. Edmund Husserl wrote a whole 2-volume book called Logical Investigations to show and argue and spend hundreds of pages pointing out how the scientific method presupposes logic. Of course it does. But now it's not immediately under the empirical purview, is it? No, of course not. So what's going on here?
What's going on is positivism. Positivism is the application of both logic and empiricism. The reason we apply positivism and the scientific method that we base in positivism is because we consistently seem to get what we want out of them. We get models that consistently seem to produce accurate predictions.
How do we explain this? Well, without getting too difficult or deep into, what can be at times very obtuse discussions or debates.
What does obtuse mean? Do you mean obtuse or abstruse?
Just simply put, in order for this process to at all make sense, there's a whole host of things that are being assumed in the process of just something like a scientist going through and studying earthworms to come up with some conclusion. And it doesn't matter whether the scientist knows about this process or he's thought about these questions or not. It's still there. Right? This scientist, he may have never had a class on logic, right? Most of the time when you debate these guys, it's like they haven't. They've never had a class on basic logic, right? Because not only do they fail at basic logic and informal fallacies, they're also not able to ask more abstracted questions about logic itself. What is the number 7? What is logic?
The number 7 is an idea, and logic is the set of rules that describe the limits of what seems to make sense to us. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.